It is safe to say that this past half year has been truly a whirlwind. It has been crazy. Two major wars continue to progress with no end in sight, one in Ukraine and one in Israel. And other conflicts have also spurred and continue from past years, including the civil war in Sudan and the war in Ethiopia. And most of us don't really know these wars and these conflicts are even happening. And we're seeing triple the casualties, triple the violence. No one is talking about them. We're also witnessing two presidential candidates who are being questioned for various reasons, most notably Biden's age and Trump's criminal trials. And we're also in the cusp of an explosion that is the rise of artificial intelligence. And this doesn't get any better. That doesn't mean that the future is all doom and gloom. That doesn't mean that we're heading into a dystopia. What that means, however, is that we must be aware and conscious about all of these challenges that we're facing so we can pave a way for a better future. Not being naive that nothing is happening across the world, but also not turning a blind eye to the conflicts that are happening across the world. And with this, we can also focus our attention into what truly matters. And these past 6 months, I've had the privilege of hosting some of the world's most brilliant minds and explore with them all of these topics because they are in the forefront of each of these topics. And this episode is really a 6-month review of Through Conversations podcast, of the conversations that we've been having with the leading thinkers across the world, and to give a follow-up into what I think are the most pressing challenges we face from now until the end of the year. And not only that, these topics will be relevant across decades. The United States presidential election, not because the election is in November, that means that the decision itself won't have consequences for the next 8 years, and not only 8 years. We can think about it as a generational, situation. Artificial intelligence, even though we're seeing right now this cycle of abundance, of innovation, that doesn't mean that it's going to turn off anytime soon. Quite the contrary, people are going to embrace it more, adopt it more. With the Israel-Hamas, Israel-Iran war, we're also almost a year into the conflict, and it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. We do see, conversations and discussions about a potential ceasefire, and then something happens, an unfortunate situation involves. We're seeing how the potential war between Israel and Hezbollah in the northern front will increase. And so all of these conflicts are truly, truly important. All these challenges are truly, truly important to shed a light on. And I'm proud to be having conversations with the most brilliant minds in the world, to share that with you and to engage with you and interact with you. And so with that, let's get going with the first conversation that I want to shed a light on. I explored the US presidential election with Issac Saul, who is the founder of our news partner, Tangle News. Issac and I discussed all of the potential scenarios that may emerge during the US presidential election cycle. And I expressed to Issac that my main concern was how in the world, during a time where we're seeing exponential technologies emerge, such as AI, we're having two of the oldest presidential candidates in the United States history. Joe Biden is older than former presidents, I think, including Bill Clinton. I think Bill Clinton is younger than Joe Biden. And Donald Trump is going to be also in his 80s if he wins. Right now, I think he's 78. But when he wins, his 4 years will lead him towards 82 years old. And so here my biggest paradox in my mind is, how are we creating so much of a tsunami wave of innovation where, we've seen the presidential debates in the past few weeks. We saw how President Biden is really struggling with his age, and not to demonize him or anything. I think the people around him are sort of more to blame, that they're pushing him to continue his presidential bid. And we're seeing how he struggles with his memory, with his articulation, with expressing his ideas, and having really a presence, a presidential presence in the debate at least. And that was the breaking moment where everyone across the news outlets, media, social media, everywhere, the American public, the worldwide leaders, and also the public saw that, President Biden might not be the best choice. And now we're seeing rumors that he may step down. And so I spoke with Issac a few months ago, and I would like to share with you a clip on his perspective on the age issue, not only about Biden, but also about Trump, how the election may play out. And this was a few months ago, but I think it's very relevant to discuss right now. Issac, here is where the political situation gets a bit murkier, especially with the context that we're living in. And this is my perspective. I don't think a lot of us are very excited about the Trump versus Biden rematch, especially with age concerns. That's my perspective, the biggest of all. Policy we can discuss a bit furthermore. But on your perspective, how should we approach this election, first of all? And secondly, what do you think this election is really about? Is it really about Trump being the best candidate and Biden being the best candidate? Or is there some deeper game being played?
So, first of all, I think everybody has different issues that are important to them. So Donald Trump and Joe Biden are very different. I wrote about this today. I think there's something that's happening right now that's really bizarre, which is both sides are sort of saying, these candidates are actually really alike. The people who are Democrats defending Joe Biden are saying, well, actually, Donald Trump is really old and he forgets stuff too, and his mind is not great either. And people who are Republicans are saying, oh, Joe Biden's immigration policies have just turned into Donald Trump's now, and he realized Donald Trump was right about everything. And it's not true. They're not the same. The age differences and the way they present are very different between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden and Donald Trump's immigration policies are really different. Their policies in foreign policy are really different. Their policies on healthcare are really different. So first of all, it matters who you vote for. It matters who the next president is going to be. It will probably impact you in some ways. And I think that's a really important thing to just consider, is that it does matter. A lot of people, I think, right now are very kind of upset with the choices we have. And so there's this fatalism, like, it doesn't matter. We're stuck with these two guys. My vote doesn't matter, whatever. And that's not true. It does. So that's one. In terms of what the election is about, I think one of the things that's really interesting in our country is it's about different things for different political parties and different voters, right? So for Democrats, I think that this election is about the abortion issue. I think it's about defending democracy. I think it's about the idea that Trump is a threat to the global world order and, might come into office and not keep funding Ukraine, and then Putin takes over Ukraine, and then we have a big problem on our hands. So that's going to be what Democrats make this election about. Republicans are going to make it about immigration. They're going to make it about the southern border, the idea that Biden's lost control of the southern border. They're going to make it about the economy, about the fact that Biden oversaw a lot of inflation and that we're still facing inflationary pressures. And they're going to make it about vengeance and kind of retribution, which is what Trump is talking a lot about right now. And this is just the idea that in Trump's 4 years in office, Democrats tried to impeach him twice. They, turned up all this stuff about him in Russia and made him seem like he was a Putin puppet. And then when he left office, they've prosecuted him and charged him with all these crimes. And now they're trying to throw him in jail. And so if he gets into office, he's going to, get payback for that. I mean, he's saying that publicly. He's saying that's his plan. And that's why people should vote for him, is because he's going to right all these wrongs. That's the reality of where it is.
As you can see, many of the things that Issac discussed right now, many of the topics really did appear during the presidential debate. We saw how both presidents discussed each of their topics, inflation, the abortion issue, immigration, handling of the economy. All of these issues really did appear on the debate, and the overarching theme of the debate really was how presidential was each of the candidates. Was Trump more presidential than Biden? Was Biden more presidential than Trump? And in my perspective, I'm very concerned. I'm still concerned on both presidents' age more than anything. It truly makes me nervous to think that Biden might have a scenario where he can really articulate any policy. If that's the case, then really who's handling the show? Who's running the business? Who's being the president of the United States? And this is my second question for Issac, which was, what would happen really if we see a scenario playing out in which Biden and Trump's age really does come into play? To double down on that question, Issac, because again, I want to stress out, I am concerned about both the candidates' ages, like I'm share with you, also what you touched on. There's been, of course, the special counsel report saying that Biden has some memory loss issues, which he rejected. Then, of course, we started seeing the videos of Trump forgetting very specific things or just very easy things to remember. So both sides are playing that card, but we're entering an age where AI is about to take over, like seriously. And then you have two candidates who are going to be, I don't know if Trump's going to be 80 when he's in his presidential tenure. So something like that. I know that Biden will. How can you have those two candidates leading the country, not only in terms of AI and all of this industrial technological revolution, but also all of these complex issues that we're facing that need quick thinking, that we need quick, a commander-in-chief who can make a decisive choice and one that is articulated, one that is justifiable, not one that makes everyone think, we're having a Mitch McConnell situation every single press conference when the president's just silent or he's speechless. So you have the border crisis, you have the Israel Hamas war that's happening in Ukraine, doesn't seem to be ending. So is this the right choice to have these two candidates in such a complex era?
For me personally, no. I would much prefer we had two different candidates from both major political parties. I think that would be a better situation, not just because of their age. Age doesn't really matter to me. I think what matters is mental acuity and fitness, and I think both of them have issues in different ways. And so my personal opinion is that I'm not thrilled about this matchup. I will say one important thing. The reason we have these two candidates is because a lot of people want this. We talk a lot about how most Americans don't want this rematch. And there's some truth in that, in the fact that most Americans don't want both of these people running. But a lot of Americans want one or the other to run. And that's the reality. If it wasn't true, then we wouldn't have them. Donald Trump's winning primaries because a lot of Americans want him to run. Joe Biden is barely trying, and there's no real opposition to him, and he's winning primaries. People are coming out to vote for him. A lot of people came out to vote for him in 2024 or in 2020, the most ever that voted in any election. So 81 million people voted for Joe Biden, right? That means there's a lot of people out there that want him to be in the White House. Maybe some of them don't want him to be in the White House for a second term, but he's certainly got enough people who turned out and helped him get in office before. So I do think it's important to remember that a lot of people want them. I think the reason a lot of people want these candidates is because we live in an era of what's called negative polarization. So the biggest motivating factor for a lot of voters is that they dislike the other party or they dislike the other candidate. So most people who are voting for Joe Biden, one of their primary concerns is that they don't want Donald Trump to be president and they think Joe Biden can beat him. And a lot of people who are voting for Donald Trump still support him and still want him in office despite all the legal troubles in January 6th and all the things that happened, because they really don't like the Democratic Party and they think that he's the guy to go in and break it and fix it, basically.
As you can see, my questions really revolved around the topic of AI, the topic of having two of the oldest presidential candidates perhaps in history, or at least close to it. And I expressed to Issac I'm really concerned with their age, and it truly showed during the presidential debate. And so, do we really need a president who can't quickly think on a decision or can't be waking up at 3 a.m. and be on top of his mind if he's sent out to the Situation Room? All of these questions are truly, truly crucial for this presidential election. And what happens if, the incentive here is to vote against the other candidate, meaning the negative polarization theme that Isaac discussed. We're choosing a future that in terms of what we don't want, rather than what we want. We don't want Joe Biden as president. We don't want Donald Trump as president. And that's our decision-making process for the election, which, if you think about it, it's not the best way to pave an optimistic future, a future that really invigorates us with energy and with action and with agency. And that's a topic I'll discuss further down the road of this episode with Eric Jorgenson and Ari Wallach. And so, doubling down with this theme of the U.S. presidential election, I also hosted Paul Poast, who is a political science and international relations expert from the University of Chicago. And I also asked him about the same situation. What about President Biden's age? What about former President Donald Trump's age? And here's what he had to say about this.
Biden being reelected. Now, of course, there's big concerns about if Biden's reelected, how will his health be? He's in his 80s. This is a concern of, would he actually be able to complete his second term? And that is going to be a big concern. And then how would that actually influence things if he's not able to complete that term? If Harris continues as the vice president, what kind of policy preferences would she want to implement? Would she just follow the same line as the Biden administration? Would she try to bring in her own views on this, her own preferences with this, and to what extent do those preferences differ from Biden? Those are the open questions. But obviously, if Biden wins re-election, I think someone like a President Zelensky of Ukraine is going to have a big sigh of relief because it eliminates that uncertainty that I was talking about with a Trump. But the question would be is, how much could that be maintained? What will happen over the course of a 4-year Biden administration? To what extent would Biden himself still be in a position to actually be able to put forward, U.S. leadership on all of these issues? That's going to be a huge question. And that could be something that in turn works against him in the general election. But the only reason it wouldn't is Trump himself is quite a bit older, right? This is a whole other issue of the fact, and many people are pointing this out, that the U.S. presidential election could come down to two people who are either 80 or pushing 80. And it's what does that mean regardless of who wins the election? Trump is not in the best health in the world, right? What could happen if he's president, and would he even be able to be in a condition to complete a second term from a health standpoint? These are big issues, big questions we have. But with Biden, I think at first there would be a sigh of relief with respect to supporting these conflicts, but there would be another form of uncertainty, which is, is Biden going to be there for 4 years to be able to continue to pursue U.S. policy the way he wants to pursue it?
And Professor, you don't see any scenario in which Biden decides, throughout the campaign trail or close to the election, or, in any given moment before the election, saying, I need to step down. I don't want re-election? Or do you see just maybe the continuation of Biden's election, just waiting until perhaps, let's just put a scenario, first year of his presidency says, it is, I don't know if it's even possible, constitutionally speaking, but if he would be to step down, do you see him stepping down before the election? Or, maybe just playing it out until he wins?
I don't see him stepping down before the election, barring some sort of health crisis, right? I think if there was some sort of, health crisis with him, then I could see that might happen. But short of that, I don't see that happening.
As you can see, even though this interview was one of the first during 2024, those topics are really relevant. Those questions are extremely important. What if President Biden steps down and Kamala Harris is the new president? What happens there? Do we want that presidential candidate to step in? Will her policies align with President Biden's? Will that isolate Democrat voters? 6 months ago, Professor Poast didn't see the possibility of Biden stepping down during the campaign trail. And when I heard him, I too thought it wouldn't be that possible after hearing his answer. But again, with the presidential debate, that's the main question. Everybody is discussing will President Biden step down anytime soon. And will they use as not an excuse or maybe a justification for stepping down or not seeking re-election any health concerns? And so these topics are extremely important right now. And I believe they are in top of mind of all of us who are going to vote in the U.S. presidential election and any stakeholder who has really a stake in the presidential election coming this November. Moving on to the next topic, I hosted Husain Abdul-Hussain, who truly shared a unique perspective on the Middle East and the Hamas-Israeli-Iran war and truly what's happening across that region. And it was really refreshing and encouraging to see a positive perspective on peace, how to build peace, and to hear his own take on what a possible solution, what a possible way out, an exit of this conflict might be. And as a no-brainer for many of us, the solution would be a two-state solution or a binational solution. And when I heard Husain Abdul-Hussain say that a binational solution wouldn't work and a two-state solution won't work either because of the differences between Israelis and Palestinians in terms of religiosity, in terms of ideals, and it was really unique to hear his take, and I would love to share a clip with you. It does sound that the binational solution, a two-state solution, is the one that's a no-brainer for most people. But you offer here a counter-argument which is interesting, and I would love to expand on it more, that this won't work. A binational solution won't work. Can you expand a bit more on this?
So, over the past 100 years, the world has discussed all kinds of possible solutions between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And, we have all the scenarios on the table. So the problem is not what we should do, it's always how we should do it. So no matter which of these we pick, we don't have the tools to do them, at least from the Palestinian side. Whatever we agree on with the Palestinians, I don't think they have anyone who's credible enough to promise and deliver on whatever they promise. But to the binational state idea, and for those who are listening who don't know, binational means that Israel and the Palestinians live in one state, a binational state where it's both Jews and Arabs, all of them as equal citizens. Now, if you play this scenario out to the end, what would the state be called? What would the flag of the state look like? What would the national emblem of the state look like? What would the official language look like? Which day would be the official holiday? Friday for the Muslims or Saturday for the Jews? And so on and so forth, to the extent that you get to the conclusion that these are two national projects that cannot be reconciled into one. We cannot just merge them into one and say, unless one of them will be dominant. So unless the Muslim would say, okay, we are okay with the Star of David being our national emblem, and we are willing to pledge allegiance to the state of Israel, and we are willing to learn Hebrew and to consider Saturday as, a day off for most of the population. Unless the Palestinians do that, how else can they live in a state and consider it their own? And vice versa, if we assume that this state is Palestine, then you're asking Jews to consider a mosque, which is the Dome of the Rock, to be their national emblem. And, the flag will be the Palestinian flag, and the Constitution will say Islam is a source of legislation. So these two national projects are clearly irreconcilable.
It's very strong to hear, that these two national projects are irreconcilable. It's very difficult to hear it in terms of trying to find a solution. But realistically speaking, what Husain Abdul-Hussain just said does make sense. They are two different national projects, and in terms of a reliable partner, in terms of, the Palestinian perspective, that's also a good take on the Israeli-Palestinian war and issue and challenge. And so hearing Husain's perspective does really shed a light on the challenges that we face in terms of finding a reliable and peaceful solution to this conflict. And then I hosted just this past week Hadeel Oueis, who is the editor-in-chief of Yusur News, and she also shared a troubling yet enlightening insight into the Middle East. Here, take a listen. Could we think about the isolation or lack of interest from the United States in Africa, in the Middle East? Could we see that as a potential turn of events where the world becomes more dangerous? Do you see the U.S. isolating itself as a potential, cause of more wars in that region?
Absolutely, and we Syrians know it more than anyone else in the Middle East, probably. Maybe some communities in the Middle East who suffered from the American wars, like the Iraqis, are excited to see Russia and China expanding their influence in their country on the expense of the United States presence. But we, as Syrians, we saw what does a Russian influence mean in our country, because when Russia entered the war in Syria and supported the Assad regime, we started to see more casualties, we started to see more suffering. Russia intervention was absolutely for worse for us as Syrian civilians, and Syria was the beginning of a new chapter for Russia's influence in the Middle East, and we see it from there now growing and expanding to other countries in the region, like Libya, like the Yemeni issue. Although Russia is very busy in the war in Ukraine, it's growing, meanwhile, also its influence in the Middle East. So I think when the United States and the former three administrations started to talk about focusing on China, on the competition with China, always this idea was accompanied with and coming with the idea of abandoning the Middle East and getting away of the Middle East and stopping what some politicians call the endless wars, either in the Middle East or in Afghanistan. And we forgot that this is a very strategic and important region that is an important and key tool now in the hands of China and Russia to win in this competition with the United States.
Wow. And it's interesting because it's kind of, we're living in a weird time where here in the US, we're seeing all of these college campuses against the United States, against Israel, and chanting for Intifada and chanting for all of these things, and for really essentially just saying that the US should step out of the equation. And what's interesting on my perspective, Hadeel, is when I listen to you and you're, echoing the voice of the Syrian people saying, Russian intervention was worse than anything, and so for me the confusion here is, or rather the question for you is, how does it feel, or what do you think about, this dissonance that we have here in the US, where we're chanting all of these themes in U.S. college campuses, and also, for example, we can also touch on Yemen, but one of the interesting things here is that Egyptian civilians who are suffering from all of what's happening in the Red Sea are supporting less of the Houthis than in U.S. college campuses. And all of these themes that, here in the U.S. we believe we have the truth, but first of all, we're not from the region, and second of all, we're not there. And so how do you make sense of all of these things, Hadeel?
Yes, I think for civilians in the region, for the future of this region, less American influence, less American footprint means worse, not better. Those who are asking now for the U.S. to stop supporting Israel, they don't see the realities on the ground. Today, Israel is under fire from the Lebanese Hezbollah group, and Hezbollah has tons and tons of weapons on the borders of Israel, and they are attacking Israel, not only from Lebanon, but also from my country, from Syria. In Syria, Iran has very big military bases right now, because the Assad regime is the closest ally for Iran as a government, not only a militia. In Iraq, they have allies, they are militias. They have allies in Lebanon, which are militias. Same for Yemen. But in Syria, the ally is a government that's controlling everything in the country, and that's giving up very important and strategic military bases for Iran. So if Israel now is weaker, if Israel is not supported by the United States, we're literally going to see a genocide against the Israeli people and against the Jews, but also against the Muslims and the Arabs and the Christians who live in Israel, because Israel is going to be attacked from all sides. It's going to be attacked from Lebanon, from Syria, and also from Gaza, from the remaining Hamas militants, and also as many know, Yemen, the Houthis are trying to attack Israel. Iraqi militias are trying to attack Israel. So saying stop the support for Israel is literally allowing all these groups to attack Israel and to commit genocides against Israeli people. And if these groups, let's say, are powerful to commit genocide against the Israeli people, they're not going to stop there, because this is not only what they're doing. The Iran-backed militias also committed horrible massacres against my people, the Syrian people, by this alliance, by the Assad regime, and by and Iran and its militias. They killed hundreds and thousands of people. A lot of civilians lost their lives on the hands of Hezbollah. And when Hezbollah is more powerful, that means all of Lebanon is under control of Hezbollah, more than what we see now. Only yesterday, a journalist that we know and that we interviewed in Jussur was beaten almost to death by Hezbollah militias inside Lebanon for criticizing Hezbollah's attacks against Israel, because the majority of the Lebanese people, they don't want Hezbollah to take them to a war with Israel. So less powerful, less strong Israel means more strong militias, a genocide against the Israeli people, but also more oppression and more massacres against civilians who refuses the control of Iran-backed militias in the region.
Wow, it's a sobering thought, and it's crazy to think that we are contemplating those potential scenarios where, in fact, none of us, or a few of us rather, at least in U.S. college campuses and across the media, really know what's happening, and I can see that you have the pulse of what's happening in the region and what the consequences might be. Hearing and listening to what Hadeel just said, it's difficult to understand, even though most of the American interventions in that region haven't worked out as planned, and we've seen so much chaos emerge there. For Hadeel's perspective, she says that less American influence in the region means more chaos, and she lived that. She experienced that firsthand when she escaped from Syria, from her country. Russian and China interest started to influence more on the region, and on her perspective, it's worse, having less American influence there. And those questions are truly important to keep an eye on. Do we want more American influence there? What does that region want? The citizens of that region, of the Middle East, want there? And in terms of Israel, it's so difficult to hear what Hadeel said, If Israel is isolated from all the world and from its biggest ally, the United States, the potential consequences of that might be what she says, a genocide against Israelis, but also against Christians, Muslims, and those who live in Israel, and also those who oppose the Irani militants or support militias, It's difficult. It's just very difficult to hear, but it's so important. Moving on now to another facet of this world, these past 6 months that we've seen so rapidly change, exponentially change, is the rise of AI, of neural implants, of technology. And I wanted to shed a light on just 2 interviews that really do reveal how immensely crazy the world is about to get. One of those is with Moran Cerf, who joined me to discuss the rise of AI and neural implants. And here's his take on, the dark side of having a neural implant, even though the benefits are insanely important, which include, giving power and giving voice and giving abilities to navigate their life to people who have disabilities, but also has a darker side. What if, your brain gets hacked by someone who has access to your neural implants? And so listen to what Moran has to say on it. You've outlined some of the benefits and some of the hype that a lot of people have in terms of this technology having a neural implant within them, Google Maps, maybe higher IQ, training more. Those are some of the benefits that you've outlined. But let's discuss the like you say, let's tame the beast. What is the beast? What are the challenges here? What is the threat of having an actual neural implant inside of me?
That's great. So that I'll amplify the question in the following way. If you heard us right now and you think I want it, here comes the part that will make you not want it. But if you leave the other part and say I definitely don't want it, you should also know that there's a good side. So it's really a pendulum here. There are a lot of good things, a lot of bad things, and the main thing you can do as an audience is not kind of listen to the last one and say this is the one I want. Like kind of keep both in your mind. It's tough to keep both things, but if you can, you'll do a better job in justice to the thing. What are the bad things? The bad things, basically, our brain becomes a commodity, and we don't know if we can trust our own thoughts. Right now, you trust your own brain. You might see information on the screen and you say, I don't trust this thing. But once you have a thought in your brain, it's 100% true. So you and I are talking right now. It's morning. You and I have this experience. If tomorrow someone says, hey, Alex, what did you do yesterday in the morning? You say, I was speaking to Moran. And this friend says, no, it's not true. You were playing tennis with me. And you say, what are you talking about? I remember I was with Moran on a podcast. We had this conversation. This guy says, no, you were playing tennis with me. And I even will show you a video of us playing tennis. Or I will bring 10 friends who will all kind of say that you were there playing tennis with me. Doesn't matter what they say. You have a memory, and your memory is stronger than anything. Like you can bring 1,000 people who will try to tell you that you were not where you were right now. Your memories will always win. We trust our memories blindly. If you know that something happened, you just know. You don't need anyone else. This is why people say, like, show me evidence, and I will. But turns out that in a world where you have a neural implant, I can put a memory in your brain, and now you would not know that it's true. You have a memory, you think it's reality, and it's actually not happened. It's something that I put there. So this is one idea. Then we can take another one. You drive your car, and you want to get to a restaurant that you like, but you don't even know how to get there. Now you would look at your phone and you would type the address and you would get a feed. And for that to happen, the computer had to go to a server, Google Maps, get the answer, show it to you. Now imagine that you have it in your brain. You drive your car and you kind of think the thought, I wish I knew how to get to this restaurant that I really like. The thought is broadcasted from your brain straight to a server, Google Maps. Ask the question, comes back, and now you know the answer. That's the great part. But what if instead of Google Maps, it goes to a hacker who plugged into your brain the wrong address? That's a small problem. Or maybe plugged a way to get you to a place that you don't want to go to, like a risky neighborhood, or even make you fall off a cliff because it controls your car and it kind of makes the automatic car off a cliff. That's when it becomes kind of risky. You wouldn't know. You would just think you know what to do, and it's not true. What if the thoughts are just being kind of up for grabs? So you ask a question, and between you asking a question of, say, Wikipedia and getting the answer, there are 10 websites to bid on what's the answer going to be. So one website says, like, tell him that World War II started in 1939. No, tell him it was actually 1917 because it began because of the Russians invading. And you start like you get answers, but the Wikipedia that you get is one that 5 different entities bid on. And maybe you think, oh, I really want to buy Diet Coke, but it was Diet Coke versus Pepsi that kind of bid on your thought and make you want that. You can see how it kind of becomes more and more volatile. You go to vote. You think that you choose, you're in the ballot by yourself in the booth. No one is there. You put a note and you think, this is my preference. How do you know? All of the world we live in right now is kind of suggesting that decisions are the core of who we are. We have, Shakespeare, to be or not to be, right? That's kind of like decisions are who we are. And we say things like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Like, you know what's beautiful to you. Or the customer is always right. Like, I know what I want to buy. Or the voters know what's best. All of those things suggest that you, at least deep inside, if you dig in your brain, you have the answers. And once you have a neural implant there, it's really a spy inside your head that kind of fights with you on what's true, and you might not know what's beautiful, what you want to buy, what you want to vote. That's the dark side.
As you can see, it's truly frightening to think that anyone who might have access to your thoughts literally can navigate your future. And now with this technology that, Moran believes a lot of people will want to have a neural implant within them, it's very literal and very real that other actors have access to your thoughts. And what happens when you don't really trust your thoughts, or your thoughts are really not true? Next on is Carissa Veliz, who joined me a few months back, and she also discussed the ethics, or lack thereof, of the rise of big tech and AI. And one of the biggest concerns here was really if these technologies would enhance our potential as human beings, would unleash our potential, or they would be tools to create more control from governments to their people, or control between each other. And my question for Carissa was regarding China, the social credit of China, and how close are we in the West to embrace that same aspect of social control with the rise of AI. And here, take a look. Switching into perhaps a deeper realm of this, Carissa, is, you touched on how democracy could be at play with these, privacy infringements that we're seeing that we are not even aware of. And one example that you've shared previously is how the China social credit system can serve as a cautionary tale for us in the Western world. And how are they using their new technologies for, their algorithms and their AI facial recognitions to control society in a literal way? And what does that tell us in the way we are harnessing that power, that data here in the Western world?
Yeah, so China has been very explicit and very forceful in its use of data and algorithms to control society. So they have a system of social credit in which people get scored. So just like you get scored as a user, say on Uber, this is like a global score for who you are as a person. And it doesn't only relate to your job or to whether you're a good neighbor or whether you're a good parent. It relates to every aspect in your life. So say you get caught smoking in a train. You will not only be banned from getting on trains, you will also be banned from getting on planes. If you're on a dating site, your profile won't be very visible. You won't be able to stay at 5-star hotels. You won't be able to get a car without a deposit. So all your life will be affected. And this stands in contrast to liberal societies. So the principle of liberal societies is that your life has this kind of compartments and they shouldn't mix. So if you do something bad at work, you might face consequences at work, but unless you did something criminal, that's not going to affect your relationship to the state. It's not going to affect your relationship to your neighbors or to your spouse. China, in contrast, is a totalitarian society in which the totality of your life is under control by the state. However, one response from China could be like, look, we're just doing the same thing as the West. It's just like we're actually telling people, and you're not telling people. And there's some truth to that. So, for instance, if you live in the United States, you are being scored as a consumer. So next time you call a company, the company will be aware of that score. And depending on your score, they will treat you differently. Maybe you'll get an answer quicker, or maybe you will be allowed to return that piece of clothing or whatever. And however, it's still the case that your life has compartments and that consumer score will not affect, say, how you show up on a dating app or whether you get a loan, at least so far. But that said, we are getting dangerously close to that kind of Chinese model. And instead of looking at the Chinese model and saying, okay, let's make sure we kind of run in the opposite direction. We're liberal democracies. This is not how we do things. We're trying to kind of imitate what they do and kind of compete against them. And of course, this is a competition that will lead nowhere good. It's a race to the moral bottom, and liberal democracy should do better.
It's quite striking, no, to hear that the West, the United States, is dangerously close to the China social credit system, where every action, regardless of where it happened, if it's in the workplace, if it's in the public transport, it has a direct impact in your social credit, which means you have fewer access to liberties, fewer access to freedoms that you have in the West. And with the rise of AI, face recognition, all of these tools that promise a ton of good things that I'll discuss further down this episode, they also pose dangers. With that said, this episode might seem like it's just doom and gloom, that the future is dystopian, but it truly isn't. It's not going to down that road. It's not going to necessarily become a dark future, but that only depends on us. It depends on our perspective on the future, on understanding these challenges, understanding that they are real. You know, we do need leadership that has the right mind, that has the vigor, that has the impetus to really thrive and to lead us to a better future. AI can unleash our creative potential, as I've discussed in previous episodes, and we can finally reach peace across the wars that we're witnessing. But that only depends on how we see the future. And I hosted Ari Wallach, who joined me to imagine new futures, ones that allow us to thrive, to imagine ourselves as thriving species rather than just considering the future as dark and just doom and gloom. Take a look on his perspective. In the trailer, A Brief History of the Future, you also mentioned that humanity is at perhaps one of the most pivotal moments in human history, that our generation will be remembered as the generation that worked throughout this pivotal moment in history. And why do you believe this? Why are we right there in that point of history? And, you know, what are the themes working around this idea?
Yeah. So look, these are obvious: climate change, artificial intelligence or machine learning, synthetic biology, bioengineering. And probably the fourth one, which you talked about, is kind of colliding superpowers that literally work at a global footprint. So this is the U.S. and China, right? The classic Thucydides trap, and how we navigate this moment. Not saying one will rise or fall, but saying it's real. So how we decide to navigate all four of those is unbelievably important, and why I say this most pivotal role for us is to decide how we navigate what I call the intertidal between what was and what will be, because all four of those have unbelievable downrange effects and planetary effects. So it's not like 150 years ago, if there was a small skirmish, it would stay localized, right? Or if you crossbred two orchids to make a hybrid orchid and something went wrong, it would just stay in that greenhouse. Or if you did a certain level of pollution or CO2, or if you polluted a river, it would only impact locally. Now these are all planetary. These are all species level megatrends or categories and frameworks that we have to decide what we want it to look like on the other side of this intertidal to successfully navigate it. Or else what we'll be doing is we'll kind of be, we know this, is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Now, this is also a story where the Titanic makes it across, right? My greatest concern, which is maybe the next question you're going to ask, is that we focus on those deck chairs and not on where it is we actually want to go. So we know we want to avoid the iceberg. The fact of the matter is we're already kind of scraping up alongside of it. You can see that around the world right now. But if we don't have our GPS synced to where we want to go, my concern is that we are not only the most pivotal generation, but we may be the one remembered by our descendants as the one that didn't do enough. And by not doing enough, it could lead, and anyone who's read Asimov and the Foundation knows this, to less than light times for decades, if not centuries. On the other hand, if over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we get these things right, we have the ability to become not only flourishing at the country level, but at the species level, on a planetary level, and on a beyond planetary level. Those are all things that we need to do in the next 1 to 2 decades.
As Ari says, we might see a future where the Titanic escapes the iceberg. The future might be one that we can choose to rise up to the challenge. We're the most pivotal generation. and we think about that in terms of responsibility for future generations and to ourselves, and we can rise to that challenge. That means having the right perspective on these kind of issues and understanding that they are real, understanding that we have to face them head on, and we can face them with the right perspective. And lastly, I wanted to share with you my interview with Eric Jorgenson, who shared with me the moral case for technology, because a lot of times, especially with AI, I've discussed the potential threats of AI, but also it is important to note that there is a moral case for technology. Technology allows us to leverage our potential, our tools to really exponentially increase not only our productivity, but also our creativity and what we can do and accomplish as a species to bring everyone with us into this new age of prosperity and abundance. Take a look on what Eric has to say on the moral case for technology. And listening to your ideas and reading them as well was that, there is a moral case to do for technology. Technology is not just, a gadget or the Apple Vision Pro. It's not just about, having the next iteration of the iOS system or whatever. There is a moral case for technology, and just that's the question that I would love for you to take on. But to give you credit, I know that in Rolling Fund, the fund that you manage, you're investing in kind of these companies that are I think it was one of the prosthetic limbs that are going to be replaced, batteries that might be bought by Elon Musk for millions. He's asking for them, but there is a moral case for technology, and I would love for you to shed a light for our listeners on what is this case. How can we shed a light on this?
Yeah, I'm glad you zeroed in on that, because I think it's the most important idea in that whole book, which is why it came first. And I hope if people take one thing away from it, it's that, right? Like, we have this perception that there's like a technology industry and it's mostly made of software and, it's iPhones and, apps. Technology is the frontier of what is possible with currently existing human technology. And we should be all deeply interested in pushing that frontier. And historically, technology has been, railroads, electrification, air conditioning, telephones, ships, cars, horses, domesticating horses even. Every time we have made a big step in technology, we have gotten, safer, more comfortable, more abundant lives that allow us to be, spend less time in zero-sum hunting, gathering, making war on each other, and more cooperative, more positive, more peaceful, more abundance, and then more resources to then invest in moving those frontiers of technology again. So every industry and every role there's an opportunity to reinvest in technology and push it. You don't have to come invest in frontier battery chemistry technology with me to make progress. And wherever you are working, just adopt a little bit of technology. And all that really means is finding ways to do more with less using tools. The example that I use in my leverage course, in technology, is sort of this compounding force of leverage. If you're a lumberjack without an axe, you're not going to make much progress. If you have a tool like an axe, you're going to be able to fell, take down a tree an hour. If you have a chainsaw, new technology came along. Now you can do 10 trees an hour. If you have a tractor, if you have a team, you have coordinated people, and the machines now that do forestry are absolutely incredible. They can cut, turn, shave a tree, plane it down, load it on a truck in seconds, and it's unbelievable. And that is the supply chain of technology behind you being able to have a roof over your head. It's because we are doing every step of this thing in a more efficient way. And a good example that we're dealing with right now is self-driving cars. 10 years ago, the concept of self-driving cars came out, and Google was kind of hey, I think we might be able to do this. And everyone's like, oh my God, cool, can't come soon enough. It's such a tragedy. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in car accidents over the last few years. We must have this technology. And now it exists and it's here and everyone's protesting it. San Francisco is blocking these cars and burning them. And who are these people who are against self-driving cars? What is show me the moral case for stopping self-driving cars that are going to be safer, that are going to relieve, hundreds of hours of menial labor for people who have to sit sedentary driving a car. every person who dies in a, drunk driving or car accident right now is a fucking tragedy. And anybody who is slowing down the development of these new technologies that allows these deaths to happen, that is morally unconscionable to me. And I don't understand the worldview of the person who's standing in the way of that new technology. And this example is just so purely cut and dry, obviously better, that it's a good one to use. But I do think anybody would be very hard pressed to name a technology in human history that has not done more good than harm.
With all of those ideas in mind, I know this was a very different episode, and I'm very happy to have done it because it truly shows that throughout these past 6 months, I have the pleasure of hosting the world's most brilliant minds, those who have a clear perspective on the future, also the present and the past, and how we can truly navigate the uncertainties, the challenges, the complexities of the present age so we can thrive in the future. So we can have a presidential candidate who can truly allows us to thrive, or we can have those discussions in terms of what we want from a presidential candidate, what we want from our democracy, what we want from our technology, from our military, from our foreign policy. These questions allow us to imagine futures where we can rise up to the challenge. And through conversations with the most brilliant minds, with each other, all of you who tune into this episode fully are brilliant minds as well, are brilliant people, and your support, your engagement, your interaction, your comments truly allow me to work towards building that future, work towards hosting more brilliant minds to have these conversations with each other and imagine a prosperous future. Again, not being naive about the challenges we face today, but having the right tools, the right skill sets, and the right conversations to really rise up to that challenge. And with that, I just want to say thank you for your support these past 6 months. I want to thank you for joining me through these conversations as we navigate the truth and we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. And if you enjoyed this episode, do let me know in the comments, share it with a loved one, review it on Apple and Spotify. Thank you for watching again, and I can't wait to see what the next 6 months hold for the podcast. Next week, we're going to have a brilliant mind indeed, a neuroscientist and an expert in AI who reveals the truth about neurotechnology and how it's impacting the future and the present right now. And we're also going to explore aliens, one of your favorite topics, next month. And so with that, thank you for watching and stay tuned. Take care.